All right, guys, today we're talking about the quadratic formula, which at the end of the day, those of you that don't like factoring, this is going to make your life a little bit easier. You're not going to have to factor. This gives you an alternative to factoring quadratics and finding the solutions that way. What the quadratic formula does, and we'll go through the proof of why this works another day. But for this video, I just want to show you how to use the formula. So if you have a quadratic equation, ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0, as long as a is not 0, and that basically means that there's an x squared, then you can use this formula, x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac divided by 2a. You use that formula to find the solutions for this equation. So suppose 2x squared plus 3x minus 5 is equal to 0. Then a is equal to 2, b is equal to 3, and c is equal to negative 5. So I plug those into the formula. I go through a whole bunch of work to solve the formula, avoiding a lot of places to make mistakes. But as long as I follow that correctly, I get a solution or two solutions to my equation. So let's go through an example and we'll actually put this into practice. So my example is x squared minus 4x equals 21. Step one, always write the equation in standard form. Just like last time, we can't do anything with it when it equals 21. We want it to equal 0. So x squared minus 4x equals 21. To make it equal 0, I have to minus 21 from both sides. So I get x squared minus 4x minus 21 equals 0. Now, one of the ways to solve this is to factor it and set those parentheses equal to 0. But for those of you that don't like to factor or aren't very good at it, this is another way of doing it. So step 2, we find the values for a, b, and c. And we're going to be really careful not to forget the negative signs. For example, a is whatever is in front of the x squared, which is 1, because there's no 2 or 3 or negative anything. There's nothing there. So we only have 1 x squared. B is whatever's in front of the x, which is a negative 4. And c is my constant right here, negative 21. Okay, so I find those values. Step 3, I plug them into the quadratic formula and I solve. I put a little note here not to forget the order of operations. We'll talk about that more as we're solving it. But really, you just have to be careful as you solve that you solve things in the correct order. So the quadratic formula says that x equals negative b. So I take in my b right here. So negative 4. And that's one we've got to be careful of. I take negative b, and b is negative 4. So I take the negative of negative 4, and then I have to add and I have to subtract the square root of b squared, so negative 4 squared, minus 4 times a, which is 1, times c, which is negative 21. And all of that is being divided by 2 times a, which is 1. So now we've just got to do some arithmetic, and we've got to be careful that we do it in the right order. So let's simplify a few things. X equals negative 4. That just becomes x equals 4. And then plus or minus, I've got my square root sign, but let's simplify some of this. Negative 4 squared is negative 4 times negative 4, so 16. Then I have these three numbers that are being multiplied. Negative 4, 1, and negative 21. So I put that in my calculator or I do it in my head. Negative 4 times 1 is negative 4. Negative 4 times negative 21 is a positive 84. And then I have my divide by 2 times 1, which is just 2. So 4 plus and minus the square root of 16 plus 84. Let's simplify that a little bit more. 4 plus or and minus 16 plus 84 is 100, and all of that has to be divided by 2. Once I get to this point, there's this plus or minus here, and some of you haven't seen that before. What that means is this is actually two different equations. One of them is 4 plus the square root of 100 divided by 2. The other one is 4 minus the square root of 100 divided by 2. Remember, in quadratics, I can have two answers, and this is what gives me my two answers. So let's simplify. 4 plus the square root of 100. That becomes 4 plus square root of 100 is 10, all divided by 2, which equals 14 divided by 2, which equals 7. So x can equal 7. That's one of my answers. Now I just solved this one. 4 minus the square root of 100 is 4 minus 10, and all of that's divided by 2. 4 minus 10 is negative 6 divided by 2. Negative 6 divided by 2 is negative 3. There's my other solution to this equation. X can equal 7, and it can also equal negative 3. So again, those of you that don't like factoring, here's another way to solve it. There's a lot of steps involved. There's a lot of math involved, but for some of you, that's going to be easier than factoring. And sometimes we can't factor the equation very well, so we're going to all be using this formula. All right, let's try a couple more. I'm going to walk you through this first one, and then I'm going to have you try the second one on your own. 4x squared plus 7x equals 15. First thing I need to do is put that in standard form. So 4x squared plus 7x. Instead of equaling 15, I want to minus 15 from both sides. So this is going to become minus 15 equals 0. So those canceled out. The minus 15 came over to the left. So now I need to look at my a, b, and c. A is equal to whatever's in front of the x squared, which is 4. B is equal to positive 7. And c is equal to negative 15. So I plug those into my formula. X equals negative b, which is negative 7. B is just 7, plus or minus the square root of b squared. So 7 squared minus 4 times a, which is 4, times c, which is negative 15. And all of that gets divided by 2 times a, which is 4. So let's do a little bit of simplifying. Negative 7 is just negative 7, plus or minus the square root. 7 squared is 49. Negative 4 times 4 is negative 16. Negative 16 times negative 15 is a positive 240. And all of that is divided by 2 times 4, which is 8. So simplify a little bit more. Negative 7 plus or minus the square root. 49 plus 249 is 289. All of that divided by 8. So now here's where I have to split this up into 2 because I have a plus and I have a minus. So negative 7 plus the square root of 289 divided by 8, and negative 7 plus this, or excuse me, negative 7 minus the square root of 289 divided by 8. So the first one, and all of these, remember, this is x equals negative, square root of 289. So I have negative 7 plus the square root of 289 is 17 divided by 8. Negative 7 plus 17 is positive 10 divided by 8, which if I simplify that becomes 5/4. So one of my answers is 5/4 or 1.25 if it wants a decimal. So there's one of my answers. The other one I get by solving this. So negative 7 minus 17 divided by 8, because the square root of 289 is 17. Negative 7 minus 17 is negative 24 divided by 8, which is just negative 3. So my solutions are 5/4 and negative 3. X equals 5/4, X equals negative 3. Okay? Here's what I'd like you to do. I want you to pause the video and I want you to try and solve this one on your own. The numbers get a little bit big because of the 110 and the 41. That's okay. Try and solve it on your own. When you're done, go ahead and hit play and follow through with me. Make sure that you did it correctly. All right, so the way we did this one, 3x squared minus 41x plus 110 equals 0. So A equals 3, B equals negative 41, and C is equal to a positive 110. So when you plug those in, X equals negative 41 plus or minus the square root of negative 41 squared minus 4 times A times C. And all of that is being divided by 2 times A, which is 3. So when I simplify, negative 41 becomes positive 41, plus or minus the square root. Negative 41 squared is 1,681. Negative 4 times 3 times 110 is a negative 1,320. And all of that gets divided by 2 times 3, which is 6. So if I simplify a little bit more, I get 41 plus or minus the square root. 1681 minus 1320 is just 361 divided by 6. We're going to split this up now to a plus and minus. 41 plus the square root of 361 divided by 6, and 41 minus the square root of 361 divided by 6. So 41 plus the square root of 361, I think, is 19, divided by 6 becomes 60 divided by 6, which equals 10. That's a great answer. 41 minus the square root of 361. So 41 minus 19 divided by 6 equals 22 divided by 6, which equals 11/3. And I'm also pretty happy with that answer. All right, 11/3 is a good number. So there's my two solutions. X is equal to 10 and 11/3. I don't want to get this decimal. I'm going to leave it as a fraction because that's not going to be a very nice decimal. Okay, so let's look at this last example. I'll go kind of quick because we've done a few of these now, but here's a story problem. A football player punts a ball. The path of the ball can be modeled by this equation. So basically, the football player kicks the football, and the football is going to go up, and then the football is going to come down. And that right there looks like a parabola. And it is a parabola. So it has this equation right here. And it wants to know if X is the distance. So X is how far the ball goes. And Y is how high the ball goes. How far from the football will the ball, from the football player will the ball land? So basically, when the ball hits the ground, when Y is equal to 0, how far away is the football player? What is my X? So I use my formula. I don't want any Y. I want Y to be 0. So negative 0.004 X squared plus X plus 2.5 needs to equal 0. That's the X I am interested in. So A is equal to a negative 0.004. B is equal to 1. And C is equal to 2.5. So I plug those in. X equals negative B, which is negative 1, plus or minus the square root of B squared. So 1 squared minus 4 times A, negative 0.004, times C, 2.5. And all of that is going to be divided by 2 times negative 0.004. So when I simplify this, x equals negative 1 plus or minus the square root. 1 squared is 1. Negative 4 times negative 0.004 times 2.5 becomes positive 0.04. And all of that is divided by a negative 0.008. All right, so I have negative 1 plus or minus the square root of 1.04 divided by negative 0.008. Now, here's where I want to be a little bit careful, because the square root of 1.04 is going to be a really ugly number. It's not something nice like our other problems. So I'm going to actually leave it in this form, especially if my problem wants an exact answer. If this doesn't come out to be a nice number, I'm not going to write down the number. I'm going to leave it square root of 1.04. So the way this works, and I'm going to move up here just to give you a little bit more room to see, is I have negative 1 plus or minus, or excuse me, we're just going to do these separately. Negative 1 plus the square root of 1.04 divided by negative 0.008. This isn't very nice, so I'm going to leave it like it is. But negative 1 is a nice number, and if I divide that by negative 0.008, I get 125. So this part becomes 125, and then I'm going to add the square root of 1.04 divided by negative 0.008. So this part divided nicely. This part isn't a nice answer. So this is going to be my answer right here. 125 plus square root of 104 divided by negative 0.008. I'm not going to use my negative answer. I'm not going to use my 125 minus, because we want to know when, we're not interested in when the ball is right here. We're interested in when the ball lands right here. And so I think, well, maybe we should be careful because we're minusing a negative. So maybe not. Maybe that's the one that we want, because I'm dividing this by negative 0.008. So that becomes 125 plus the square root of 104 divided by 0.008. So if I plug that in my calculator, let's see what we get. Let's go here and go to my home screen and put the square root, second square root of 1.04. And then I'm going to take that answer and I want to divide that by 0.008. And let's see what it gives me. See, it gives me this really ugly decimal, 127.475, blah, 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 blah. But if I go back to my problem, so if I'm doing 125 plus 127 point blah, 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 I'm going to be really far from my person. If I try using this one, this one, 125 plus, because I divided by a negative, that's actually minus 127 point blah, 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 blah. This becomes a negative answer. And I can't be a negative distance away. So I'm going to ignore that answer and I'm going to use this one right here. So sometimes when it gives us ugly decimals, we don't want to put in that decimal as an answer. I want to put in this exact form. In fact, on your homework, there's at least one problem that wants the exact answer, and it's going to look something like this. You're not going to actually give it a decimal. You're going to leave it in this form, okay? All right, couple more things, and then I'm just going to let you get to the practice. There's a lot of methods we've talked about for solving quadratics. We've talked about graphing, which you use if you have a graphing calculator and if it has nice If it has nice answers, that's a great way. Square roots, if there's no x term in the middle, we use the square root form method. If it factors easily, if you know how to factor it, if you can figure that out, then that's a method that you can use. Completing the square, we're not going to talk about that this year, at least not yet. The quadratic formula is what we just did today, and that always works. You can pretty much always use the quadratic formula. So you choose which method is going to work best for you. So if these were my cases, x squared minus 8x plus 12, maybe I'm really good at factoring, and I can recognize quickly how to factor that, and that's going to be the fastest solution. It might graph nicely, so that's one possible way. If not, then maybe I would do the quadratic formula. This one in the middle kind of looks really messy. 169x squared equals 36. So 169x squared minus 36 equals 0. Maybe you can factor that. It is easy to factor if you remember the shortcuts. If not, you could try a graph. I don't know if your numbers would come out very nice. Actually, they won't come out very nice. So graphing is probably not a very good way to do it. So the quadratic formula might be your best bet. Even though you have a really big A and a big C, your B is just going to equal 0. Maybe the quadratic formula works. And the last one, if you can factor it, great. If not, just try the quadratic formula and maybe try graphing it. So there's a lot of different ways you can use these. It just depends on what's going to, what works for you, which ones you like. This one in the middle, actually, we could also do the square root version. That might be the fastest because all I have to do is divide by 169 and find the square root. So that might be the fastest for the middle one. I forgot about that method for a minute. So one more thing, and I hesitated to bring this up, but the truth is this is one of those things that they really look at on the ACT. I can almost guarantee that there are questions on there that are going to ask something like this, okay? So quadratic equations, they can either have 2 answers, 1 answer, or no real number solutions. And a lot of times you're asked to figure out how many solutions an equation has. You don't actually have to find them. It just wants to know how many solutions there are. And the key to figuring this out is we use the discriminant. And the discriminant is basically what's underneath the square root in our quadratic formula. So that b squared minus 4ac, that's what we use to figure out how many solutions there are. And here's how it works. If b squared minus 4ac is greater than 0, we can take the square root of it. We can take the square root of 4 and the square root of 8 and the square root of 1.3795. Sometimes they're not nice, but we can take the square root. So if this part, b squared minus 4ac, is bigger than 0, there are 2 solutions. And the graph looks something like this. It crosses twice. If b squared minus 4ac is equal to 0, if you end up with the square root of 0, then there's only 1 solution because the graph only touches the x-axis. It doesn't cross over it. If b squared minus 4ac is less than 0, so if you get the square root of -4 or the square root of -7, there are no real number solutions. And that's because in the real world, that does not exist. There's no number multiplied by itself that becomes negative, because a negative times a negative is a positive. So this is impossible in the real world. So we're going to try a couple of these. 6x squared minus 5x equals 7. 6x squared minus 5x minus 7 equals 0. So a equals 6, b equals -5, and c equals -7. So if I just focus on this part, because I just want to know how many solutions. So I'm just going to focus on the discriminant. So b squared, -5 squared minus 4 times a, which is 6, times c, which is negative 7. Negative 5 squared is 25. Negative 4 times 6 times negative 7 is 168, a positive 168. So when I add those together, I get 193. 193 is greater than 0. So that means there are two solutions. So there's two solutions on the first group. On this one, 9x squared plus 12x plus 4, a equals 9, b equals 12, c equals 4. So 12 squared minus 4 times 9 times c times 4. When I solve this, 144 minus negative 4 times 9 times 4 is negative 144. So 144 minus 144 is 0. So my discriminant is equal to 0. So that means there is only one solution. 0 is not my solution. That means there's only one solution. And up here, 2 is not my solution. It just means there are two solutions. So then the last one, a equals negative 2, b equals 4, c equals negative 7. So b squared, or excuse me, negative b squared, and it's a positive 4. So 4 squared minus 4 times negative 2 times negative 7. This becomes 16. Negative 4 times negative 2 times negative 7 is what? Negative 64? Because 4 times 2 is 8. 8 times 7 is not 64. 4 times 2 is 8. 8 times 8 is 64. So this one is just 56. 16 minus 56 is negative 40. Okay. Negative 40 is less than 0. So there are no solutions in the real world. There's no solutions. I should maybe put there's no real solutions. There's no real solutions to this function. So it looks like this. It never crosses the x-axis, so there's no real solutions. Okay? All right, time for homework. We skipped homework 8. So homework 8, don't look for it. It's not there. What you're going to be focusing on is homework 9. Remember, it's due next Tuesday, which is October. Nope, not October. September what? Next Tuesday is going to be September 25th. So good luck on the homework. If you need help, come in and see me. I'll do what I can.